Ladies and gentlemen, fight fans all around the world, before I go into what I'm about to talk about, I want to give all credit and all allegiance, all glory to the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, my personal Savior, delivering me from a lot of stomach problems. And I advise you today, have Him in your life. You can't go wrong. All you have to do is say, ask the Lord Jesus to be in your life and to get to know Him. Any request you give to Him, He will answer. Let's talk about Floyd Mayweather Jr. again. This is Floyd Mayweather Jr., but this time it's not TBE, it's just addressing some allegations. People say that Floyd Mayweather Jr. he either faced opponents which were past their prime and therefore they were a shell of themselves, or he faced opponents who they were good fighters, but after he beat them, they became nobodies. So let's look at that. And let's challenge that statement. Let's look at the first opponent that Floyd Mayweather faced who was a legitimate threat to him. And that person would be the legendary Diego Corrales. Diego Corrales faced Floyd Mayweather January the 20th of 2001. At super featherweight. Diego Corrales coming off of defeating an opponent to defend his IBF World super featherweight title. He would be stripped not about a couple months later, and then he would face Floyd Mayweather for his WBC World Super Featherweight title. A fight in which Floyd Mayweather was able to stop Diego Corrales after knocking him down 5 times. Now, just so you guys know that Diego Corrales was not shot, he was in the peak prime of his career, and Diego Corrales was a legendary fighter. We look at Diego Corrales after being beaten by Floyd Mayweather. So Diego Corrales had stopped Angel Manfredi to defend his IBF Super Featherweight title for the 5th time. Okay? He had defended the title successfully 5 times. And then he would go on to face Floyd Mayweather. After losing to Floyd Mayweather, Diego Corrales would go on to still regain a Super Featherweight Championship title, the vacant WBO title, against a top contender in the Super Featherweight division, Joel Casamayor. He would then go on to face another guy who used to be at Super Featherweight but now at lightweight dominating, Acelino Freitas. And he would stop Acelino Freitas in the 10th round. His following fight saw him unifying against Jose Luis Castillo, the man at lightweight and lineal champion. He would knock out Castillo in the 10th round. Not only was Diego Corrales a dominant super featherweight and the #1 super featherweight in the world when Floyd Mayweather faced him, but he would go on to have legendary status, moving up and first of all beating the top super featherweight in the world at the time, Joel Casamayor, and then after that defeating the next top super featherweight in the world, now lightweight in the world, Acelino Freitas, knocking him out. Then he would take on the top lightweight in the world and defeat him in Jose Luis Castillo. Diego Corrales was far from being shot, was in his prime, and his career absolutely went to legendary status after his loss to Floyd Mayweather, making all of those statements that people accuse Floyd Mayweather of having non-existent, null, and obsolete. Mayweather would then go on to face Carlos Hernandez. Carlos Hernandez was able to survive to the final round, Floyd Mayweather having hand problems, and Carlos Hernandez was relentless coming after Floyd Mayweather. What happened to Carlos Hernandez after being beaten by Floyd Mayweather? Well, Carlos Hernandez went on a winning streak in which he was able to defeat David Santos to get the vacant IBF Super Featherweight title. He became a Super Featherweight champion, defending his title against Steve Forbes, who was a former Super Featherweight, IBF actually, Super Featherweight champion. He would then lose to Eric Morales when he tried to unify. This guy was in the prime of his career when he faced Floyd Mayweather, but not only that, He also showed that he did not fade after losing to Floyd Mayweather, but became a world champion. Not only a world champion, but defeated a legitimate contender in Steve Forbes. That's the second name that discredits the accusations that Floyd fought either shot fighters or fighters outside of their prime, and they became obsolete after he beat them. The legendary Jose Luis Castillo, in the top 25 lightweights of all time. But before he faced Jose Luis Castillo, he faced Jesus Chavez, the relentless Jesus Chavez. And Jesus Chavez, after being defeated by Floyd Mayweather Jr., went on not just to win the super featherweight title, which he won against a Taiwanese fighter, but then he goes on to win the lightweight title against Levander Johnson, a very good boxer, and secure that, even though he lost it right after to Julio Diaz, just as though he lost his title to Eric Morales, who then went on to face Carlos Hernandez. He did defeat Carlos Hernandez, however, in his super featherweight title eliminator, but never faced Eric Morales after that. Now, what is very interesting about all of these fighters I just mentioned is that they were in their primes when they faced Floyd Mayweather, and even so, they did not get washed up after they faced and lost to Floyd Mayweather, even though Jesus Chavez was stopped. Jesus Chavez, by the way, became a fan of Floyd Mayweather after losing to him. Now, Floyd Mayweather also faced Jose Luis Castillo. And Jose Luis Castillo, just for the record, was a legendary fighter like Diego Corrales. Castillo, after losing to Floyd Mayweather, well, let's just deal with the first part. Castillo, before facing Floyd Mayweather, was a legendary champion. He was the lineal champion of the lightweight division. He was the man of the division because he beat the man of the division, Stevie Johnson. And then he cleaned up shop by beating the other guy that beat Stevie Johnson, Cesar Bazan. So he faces Floyd Mayweather. After Floyd Mayweather beats him twice, Jose Luis Castillo goes on to face Juan Lascanzo, defeating him to get the WBC World Lightweight title once again. He would then defeat Joel Casimir at lightweight. That was the guy who was the name at super featherweight, the guy who would go on to beat Diego Corrales. He then beats Julio Diaz, who was the IBF lightweight champion, and then he goes on to face Diego Corrales, losing to him in the unification bout, but coming back in the following fight, though it wasn't a championship fight because he couldn't make weight, and defeating Diego Corrales, knocking him out in the 4th round. This dude cleaned up house, beating everybody who was somebody, or at least facing everybody who was somebody in the lightweight division. He was a dominant, legendary lightweight, and he's the top 25 lightweights of all time. So after facing Floyd Mayweather and losing to him, Jose Luis Castillo comes back to beat every other lightweight that ever enters the division, cleaning up shop, okay? Once again, this lie that Floyd Mayweather fought guys outside their primes, and that if he beat a fighter, the fighter would be washed up or the fighter would not perform again, has been disproven 4 times. After beating Jose Luis Castillo, Floyd Mayweather would face Zab Judah. Zab Judah was at the time the IBF World Welterweight Champion. Now, Zab Judah, unlike the other guys we just spoke about, while he was the undisputed welterweight champion of the world, Zab Judah, and he was a world champion before facing Floyd Mayweather, both at super lightweight and also at welterweight. Zab Judah would go through a series of losses, being beaten by Miguel Cotto, and then coming back and being beaten by Joshua Clottey for the vacant IBF welterweight title. But he would, later on, come to face Lucas Matisse, survive Lucas Matisse, beating him narrowly, even though he was knocked down in round 10. And then he would go on to win the vacant IBF super lightweight title for the final time against Kaiser Mabusa, stopping Kaiser Mabusa in the 7th round. So while Zab Judah, we can't say he was washed up, he did kind of fade some after losing to Floyd Mayweather. But he was faded even before he faced Floyd Mayweather, because before he faced Floyd Mayweather, he had lost to Carlos Baldomir. And he was the last undisputed welterweight champion of the world to do so at welterweight. Okay? Now, Zab Judah, in part, was kind of washed up. You can give a saying that, okay, Zab was a bit washed up by the time he faced Floyd Mayweather. Even though Zab was still in his prime, it's his prime years, you could say he was at the tail end of his prime. So I'll give you guys that one. But then we have Juan Manuel Marquez. Now, why I say that Juan Manuel Marquez, when we're talking about boxing prime, he was in his boxing prime, but when we talk about his physical prime, he was way past his physical prime, is because what Juan Manuel Marquez did after facing Floyd Mayweather. First of all, Marquez was able to beat Juan Diaz before he faced Floyd Mayweather to get 2 of the unified boxing titles of 4. He became the WBO WBA lightweight champion by beating Juan Diaz, who was the man of the division at the time. He had also come off of beating Joel Casamayor, knocking him out, though Casamayor was stripped of his title at the time. He would then go on to face Floyd Mayweather Jr. and be beaten by unanimous decision, even knocked down in the second round. But he would come back to face Juan Diaz, and he would defeat him once again by unanimous decision to retain his unified WBO WBA lightweight title. He would then successfully defend it against Michael Katsidis. He would face Manny Pacquiao for a third time and lose by majority decision, even though the fight was once again very close. Then he would move up to super lightweight and beat Sergey Fedchenko by unanimous decision in Mexico to win the super lightweight title. He had an interim title at first. So he went on to do all of these things, and then he went on to lose to Timothy Bradley, but he would knock out Manny Pacquiao. And why I say that Marquez was in the prime of his career is because you can't knock out Manny Pacquiao. You can't be winning all these world titles after losing to Floyd Mayweather. And again, this disproves the notion that these guys were washed up, or they were past their primes, or that they did not perform after they lost to Mayweather. These are all lies. Now, Mayweather also faced Miguel Cotto. Miguel Cotto, after he lost to Mayweather, because he was an outstanding world champion, Miguel Cotto was the super welterweight champion. After he lost to Manny Pacquiao, he went up to super welterweight, and in 3 straight fights, he was able to beat a world champion and 2 notable super welterweights in Ricardo Mayorga and Antonio Margarito. Now, when we look at Miguel Cotto's resume, after losing to Mayweather, he did lose to Austin Trout. But after that, he was on a winning streak such that he beat the man at middleweight, Sergio Martinez, winning the world middleweight title. He would lose in a relatively well-fought chess match and held his own quite well against Saul Canelo Alvarez. That's how he lost his title. But once again, you cannot say that Miguel Cotto was washed up, because Miguel Cotto was able to win the middleweight title of the world against a very notable opponent in Sergio Martinez. So once again, while some people may argue Miguel Cotto was not in his prime, he definitely wasn't washed up after he faced Floyd Mayweather, creating history, becoming the first Puerto Rican fighter to win 4 world titles in 4 different divisions. After facing Miguel Cotto, Floyd Mayweather faced Saul Canelo Alvarez. But before I even talk about him, let's talk about Robert Guerrero. Robert Guerrero, contrary to popular opinion, was not dying off after he faced Floyd Mayweather, even though he had some significant losses. He was able to stand up against Keith Thurman. He then lost to Danny Garcia and Peralta. By all accounts here, you have to agree that Robert Guerrero had started a steep decline right after losing to Floyd Mayweather. So here, people actually have grounds to say that Floyd Mayweather here had fought a Robert Guerrero who had peaked, and now he was washed up after being beaten by Floyd Mayweather. You could say the same for Ricky Hatton. However, when you talk about Saul Canelo Alvarez's career points to the absolute opposite. Canelo, before he faced Floyd, was unified champion. He was on the rise, beating Austin Trout. Now, after his horrible loss to Floyd Mayweather, he would go on to beat Arislan Lara, then become the middleweight champion of the world in Miguel Cotto, and currently he's the WBO super welterweight champion of the world, beating Liam Smith, an undefeated fighter. So, at the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez is on a legendary status trek. He not only has done well after being beaten by Floyd Mayweather, but he has actually moved up in weight to win the middleweight championship after facing Floyd Mayweather. He obviously was in his prime and still is in his prime, and he is not washed up at all. There are two other people we must talk about. The first one is Manny Pacquiao. After Manny Pacquiao faced Floyd Mayweather, we know the remarkable career Manny Pacquiao has had. Not only did Manny Pacquiao perform on a higher level, that is to say he got wins, he regained the WBO welterweight championship against Timothy Bradley, and he dropped Timothy Bradley twice in that fight. Never did that. He outperformed himself. And then he beat Jesse Vargas, who was the WBO welterweight champion after a slight retirement. Now he's going to go face Amir Khan. All in all, what I'm saying is Manny Pacquiao has not been washed up. And as much as people would like to make it sound like Manny Pacquiao's washed up, his performances don't show that. It shows that he's actually been more brilliant than he's ever been in his career, and smarter and sharper. Finally, the last person we're going to talk about is Andre Berto. Andre Berto was considered a washed-up fighter. Yet, after he has faced Floyd Mayweather, he has had a knockout win against Victor Ortiz, avenging his loss. Not only that, but before that fight, he also knocked out Josecito Lopez, and he had a unanimous decision win against Steve Upton Chambers. This is coming off of a 12th round stoppage against Jesus Soto Carras. So again, at the end of the day, this guy's career is not messed up. If anything, his career is doing better, and it shows he's not washed up. Do you think he's past his prime? Probably he's at the end of his prime. But the point anyway is this: he is doing better than he ever did in his career. So Andre Berto, once again, contradicts the notion that when you face Floyd Mayweather after facing him, you're washed up or you do worse or your career is over. Furthermore, almost all the fighters I just mentioned, they were in their prime. Andre Berto was still in his prime when he faced Floyd Mayweather. Okay, not Manny Pacquiao, even though Manny Pacquiao is performing better than he's ever performed in his career. Alvarez was in his prime. Guerrero was in his prime. Okay, Cotto wasn't exactly in his prime, but he has outperformed how he was performing before. Marquez, he was in his prime, clearly. Not physical prime, but prime. Zav Judah was in his prime. Castillo was in his prime. Chavez was in his prime. Hernandez was in prime. And Corrales was in his prime. So when we hear these general statements, oh, Mayweather, he fought guys either out of their prime or guys who were on the downhill slope or guys who did not do anything after he beat them, that is a false statement. And it is one in which you must disregard when you hear it, because the facts point to something else. I'm not saying that it's completely false, because there are cases like Ricky Hatton, like Robert Guerrero, and a number of other fighters who, after they faced Floyd, they were wrecked. But for the most part, most of the fighters that faced Floyd were not wrecked. Oh, Oscar De La Hoya was another one, and Shane Mosley. They both have wrecked careers since facing Floyd. But the majority of people who faced Floyd actually benefited from facing him, and their careers actually got better. On that note, you guys have a great one.